I don't know. I don't know.
Go turn the air conditioner.
I'm going to see what it's more like. Look at the screen and say, need more like.
There.
Well, hey, everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to tonight's Ingles on the Beat segment. Really pleased to have a special guest with us tonight, as we do on Monday nights, former Georgia coach Ray Goff. And, Coach, I'm so thrilled to have you on the program. I know you don't make a whole lot of these public videos or public appearances anymore. You kind of stay busy. Why don't you go ahead and catch us up a little bit on what's happened since you've been coaching in Georgia?
Well, I got fired.
That's old news, man.
You know, I played at Georgia, and it's home. I'm from a little town, South Georgia, called Moultrie. And when I got through, after I got fired, I really didn't know what in the heck I was going to do the rest of my life. And I started eating out a lot, and I started eating at a place called Zaxby's. And so one day I just decided that, you know, heck, I'm just going to get in the food business. And so I've gotten in the restaurant business, and we've done extremely well and very blessed.
Yeah, I'm waiting on some Zaxby's for dinner tonight. As a matter of fact, obviously you've stayed in the area here in Oconee County. You're close to the Georgia program. What do you think about these Bulldogs right now?
You know, I think Kirby's done a great job, and Kirby played for me when he came, and he was really a good player for us. And he's a very highly motivated young man. And his father and the people he played with in high school just did a great job with him. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for Kirby, but also Kirby's father and some other people that have, you know, kind of really been big in his life.
Well, you know, they say that not much happens in Athens without Kirby Smart. So I don't think we could have done this without Kirby. So, Kirby, got a surprise for you, Coach.
Yeah, what's up, Coach? I hope you can see me here.
Oh, yeah. I tell you what, you're getting a little weight on, buddy. You got to get out and go out and start running some. You can't play in the secondary, you know, unless you do that.
No, I moved to linebacker, but I haven't put my hand down yet. I'm still not a 3 technique yet, so I'm still all the way up there.
Well, I'm sitting here with Brian Gant. He hooked me up for this because I'm not very good on these computer things. I know this is the way y'all recruit nowadays.
That's right. I was trying to surprise you. See, I said he ain't gonna know I'm on here. So Gant had y'all set up. I wanted to be able to surprise you a little bit and see how you're doing. You doing good? I'm
doing great. How's your mom and daddy doing and your family?
They are awesome. They're incredible. They always ask about you and if I had seen you. Let me tell you something, Mike. He was really good to my dad and our family. First of all, just to sign me, because to sign me was a liability. I can promise you. He started to say great player, then he went back to good. I did earlier. But, you know, he signed a lot of really good high school players, especially in the state of Georgia. When I think back to all the guys I played with and the guys he was able to sign, of course, that was also the crew that probably got him fired. But to be honest with you, a lot of that had to do with injury because, you know, Robert Edwards, who is probably one of the best athletes next to Champ Bailey I've ever been able to play with. And if Robert Edwards doesn't get hurt and Mike Bobo that year, I mean, he had some really bad luck in injuries, but man, he signed a lot of good kids. I mean, he's affected the coaching profession. He's had a huge impact. When you think about Will Muschamp, you think about Robert Edwards in coaching, you think about all the guys, Hines Ward's in coaching, all these guys he signed are coaches.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll give you some money after this is over, okay?
Well, Kirby,
you don't need any.
Kirby, what was recruiting like? I think I remember you saying you used to camp at Troy and you might have taken a couple other visits, but what was your recruitment like with Coach Goff in Georgia?
Well, it was very unique. You know, I would say they did the best job of forming relationships with me. I mean, Florida recruited me, but they didn't have the same relationships. First of all, Coach Goff knew my dad forever. I remember being a little ball boy watching Thomasville against Thomasville Central, and he was on the sideline. And to this day, I still thought that like Coach Goff was Bear Bryant. He was tall, he was standing over me, and I was a little 5-6-year-old, and my dad's team, Bainbridge, had gotten beat by both Thomasville and Thomasville Central. Well, there were about 5 of the greatest players to ever play college football on that field that night, between Sean Jones, Mike Jones, Eric Curry, Charlie Ward. It was just an unbelievable group. And I was sitting on the sideline watching those guys play with my dad right by Coach Goff. But he had a great relationship. He had a coach that did a tremendous job. Coach Bell formed a relationship with me and communicated with me every week. I remember he would call, check in, ask about the family, what was going on. No other schools really recruited me that hard. Georgia Southern did, Furman did, Southern Miss did, and Duke, a couple others. But Georgia did the best job of recruiting me. But I didn't get offered till the night before signing day. It was a great story because Steve Johnson, a DB from McKeachin, flipped to Tennessee. And when he flipped to Tennessee, Coach Goff and them called and said, it looks like we're going to have a nice spot for you. And, of course, I jumped all over it then.
Well, Coach Goff, what was going to say? What do you recollect? I remember Steve Johnson going to Tennessee. He was a starter up there for the Vols. I never realized that big part of Georgia history he played.
Yeah, and Kirby was a starter for us as well. So it worked out great. And, I admire Kirby a lot, but I love his dad. I mean, his dad and George Bobo and all those guys were down there together, Mike's father. And they just had a very unique relationship with them. It was just really good. And we would have signed Kirby, whether we had room or not. But he was a good player for us. And but just more importantly, he was a coach's father. His father was a coach. And so, that really was big for us because we wanted to recruit coaches' sons if we could, because one day they might have a player that that could make a big impact for us. But Kirby's dad's one of the finest men I've ever been around.
Well, one question I got for both of y'all, I don't know if you may or may not know this, but going back in Georgia history, all the way back to the very first coach, Charles Hurdy, in 1892, Georgia's got quite a history of coaches that were also players at Georgia. And I guess I'd like to ask, and I'll start with you, Coach Goff, and then we'll finish up with you, Kirby. Being a former player and coaching at your alma mater, is there an added pressure? Is there something unique or something special about it? Or did it seem to add any allure to you, Coach?
I think it did a little bit. I'm not one to whine and complain. I mean, I love the state of Georgia, and I love the people in this state. And, I enjoyed it. I was there 7 years, 8 as an assistant coach, and then 7 as a head coach. So I was there 15 years, and I enjoyed it. I met a lot of great people in this state, a lot of coaches, a lot of players, and just the people at the University of Georgia. I mean, I can't tell you how much impact that they've made in my life.
How about you, Coach?
Yeah, it was funny because when I got the job, I asked Coach Goff to stop by and see me, and he doesn't come up there very often, and that really never comes up there. But he he stopped by one time. Yeah, it's gotten too big. But I had a lot of questions for him about what the positives and negatives of being at your alma mater, and what I found is the first year. It had nothing to do with the outcomes of wins and losses. I'm not making excuses for wins and losses, but there's a lot of pressure of your time, and you only have so much time in the day. And in this world of recruiting we live in, I'm a pleaser. I want to try to make people happy. I want to spend time with them. And what I found was the negative to being at Georgia was that everybody that knew me, whether I coached them as a coach or I played with them as a player or they were a letterman, they felt like, they deserved 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And at some point, you got to have somebody be the bad guy. And that's kind of what he let me know. He said, it's important to treat people right, but you got to understand that you only have so much time to get things done. And you can't make everybody happy. That was the unique thing about being in Alabama. Nobody ever came up there wanting to see me in Alabama because I played with them or that I knew who they were. So you got to work. You got to do your job in that time. That's the burden and you carry with you as a former player, that you want to do well for your alma mater. And every game, regardless of what people say about me and Coach Goff, I promise you, we want to win worse than the fans do. Some of them don't understand that. We want to win for these kids and the coaches on your staff's families and the program, and we all want to do that. But there's a lot of pressure when you're at your alma mater. The benefit is you can sell it better than anybody. I mean, I can sell the experience I had there under Coach Goff's staff and how good they were to me and the success that being a graduate of University of Georgia's done. All those things are just remarkable. So it's a lot more positives than negatives.
Yeah, good stuff there, Coach Goff. And Coach Smart, I really appreciate you joining us on short notice. I know that, boom, right away, as soon as you heard Coach Goff was going to be on the show, you volunteered some time. And obviously I know that means a lot to Georgia fans because here it is. I mean, a former player stepping up and being there for his coach tonight. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'll say this. I appreciate you offering me and giving me the opportunity. It's not many opportunities I jump at like that, but when you said Coach Goff's name, I wasn't going to miss it for the world because that guy has meant a lot to me and my family, and he's special to me, and I appreciate you, Coach Goff. Thank you.
Well, you kind of make me tear up here. I mean, I appreciate it, Kirby. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Coach-player relationship, and that's how it's supposed to be. You hear Kirby talk about family, and you hear Coach Goff talk about family. In fact, Coach Goff kind of lives that family life right now. And when we were talking earlier, Coach, about Zaxby's, you told me one of the really cool things about this for you is that you do have your family involved in your business every day.
Yeah, they, they're all owners, and they own more than I own. And I've always wanted to take care of my children, and I've got 2 daughters, and I've got 6 grandchildren, 6 to be, and so they all are owners as well. So I've got 2 daughters that I love and just do anything in the world for, and then the grandchildren. I'm telling you, when you get a grandchild, there's nothing better in the world.
Yeah, it's quite a treat, and it's funny, you were telling me you were watching a replay of the 1977 Sugar Bowl after that 76 season. And, people, the Twitter generation, if they can remember back to 2000, that's good. But before that, if it ain't on the internet, they may not know it. 1976, you were the SEC Player of the Year. And I look back at your career and some of the wins and some of the guys you played with. But the thing that struck me as interesting, talking with Claude Felton last night, who's still there, the Hall of Fame SID that works with Kirby now and obviously worked with you. There were 4 or 5 quarterbacks or something like that. Kirby's got 5 on scholarship and 9 on the roster. Apparently that's nothing new, though. Didn't you come into a pretty crowded room? And what was that like as a young man?
Yeah, I remember when I was in Moultrie, and Coach Sterling Dupree was recruiting me, and he and Coach Dooley, and I don't mean any disrespect at all, but they told me that I was the only quarterback they were going to sign. When I got here, there were 6 of us in the freshman class, and Matt Robinson was here, Dickie Clark was here, had a guy named Phil Porter, myself, and there's a couple more, and but it's it wasn't long before you forget about those things, and you just play the game. And I was, the University of Georgia has been so good to me and the people in this state that I don't have any complaints whatsoever.
What do you remember? Were there any special games in your career? I think there was a Cotton Bowl in there. Claude was telling me you ran the veer, obviously the Sugar Bowl. When you think about your time as a player at Georgia, what jumps out to you?
Well, when I came out of high school, they told me we were going to throw the football, but I think I threw it about 30 times in 4 years. So obviously I wasn't very good at throwing enough, but we changed the philosophy change. We had a coach by the name of Bill Pace, and Coach Pace was a good man and a good coach. And we started running the veer. That was when the wishbone and the veer came into contact with schools, and we ran the veer, and I was just very blessed. First of all, we had some really great offensive linemen. I mean, I played with 4 or 5 guys that played pro football, and not only that, they were really outstanding players. And and when you got those kind of people in front of you, anybody can be pretty good.
Folks, you're watching the Ingles on the Beat show. Our special guest tonight, Ray Goff. We had the cameo from Kirby Smart a little bit earlier. And, of course, we've seen quarterbacks over the years change the nature of the game. Claude was telling me a story about you having an elbow injury one game before Auburn that apparently I don't know if you hid it from the staff or you just didn't tell anybody, but you beat Auburn in a football game with no passes thrown. Or what year was that for you? And what do you remember about that scenario?
I think it was 1976, and we played Auburn, didn't throw a pass. And I had a burster sack in my elbow, and they had to shoot it up so I could play. And we went out. We were fortunate enough to win the football game, but we did not throw a pass the whole game. And I couldn't throw. And Matt Robinson could have, but we were running the football so well that we just stuck with that the whole game. And we were very fortunate to beat them on a Saturday night.
Now, you finished your career with Georgia, and didn't you head to Denver? What was the story about how far you got with the league? What happened there with the Broncos?
You know, I went out and signed as a free agent, and I was there for a while, and I realized this isn't for me. So they gave me a check then of $1,000 to sign to play. And I gave them the check back, and they said, "No, you can keep it." And I said, "No, sir. My dad brought me up. You don't take something for nothing." And so I gave them my check back, and I got on the airplane, came back to Georgia, and I was a graduate assistant for a year. And then I went over to South Carolina with Coach Jim Carlin, who really made a big impact in my life, and was a fine man. And stayed there for 3 years, and then I came back to Georgia and stayed here for 15 years.
You know, we were talking about the coaching tree a little bit earlier with Kirby. Didn't you tell me Mark D'Antonio was at South Carolina while you were there? Did you overlap with him?
He was. He and his brother John D'Antonio, they were there, and John was. They were good players, really good players. We were very fortunate. We had a pretty good football team when I was over. I had a guy by the name of George Rogers that played running back, and I was around George a lot, and George is a piece of work, and he's a character.
You've been around a few of them, because then you came back to Georgia and you were coached with Coach Dooley. And what was that like to be back as an assistant coach at Georgia under a coach that you'd played for?
Well, I came back. I was really came back as a recruiting coordinator, and so I did that for 2 or 3 years. And then Coach Mike Cavan, was here coaching the running backs, and then he left, and I think he went to East Tennessee State or somewhere like that. He left to go there, and then I moved up and was a running backs coach for about 4 or 5 years.
How much do you think?
I mean, this is where I grew up.
Yeah, I was going to say, but how much is? I mean, when I think about, when Kirby talks about his relationships, obviously he's got a reputation as a great recruiter. You had a reputation as a fabulous recruiter. How much has it really changed? Is it relationships? I mean, I know there's Twitter and social media and all that, but at the end of the day, Coach, do you think it comes down to the same things for programs?
Well, I don't know. I can't tell you what they're doing today. I can just tell you what we did in the old days. I mean, you couldn't see anybody but one time a week and things like that. You couldn't have so many visits to, I think it was 5 visits or things of that nature, but it was a different world back in those days. And, you could get them on campus, and as much as you could get them here, you could really recruit them. But it's just a different world today than it was then. Just like, I was just watching TV and on the quarterbacks moving somewhere and running backs going somewhere, and people have no loyalty anymore. I mean, I think the guys that I played with, I don't know that we had a lot of guys to leave. I mean, whether they liked it or not, they stayed. And but today, now you got guys, they're just going crazy. It's an interesting thing to do that they're doing.
Yeah, and signing day is different. Didn't you actually go to a bunch of schools on signing day and have to travel around? I mean, what was that? Was there airfare and airplanes and all that on signing day?
I think my first year here, when I was a recruiting coordinator, I signed 10 players myself, and that I had recruited. And so to get all 10 of them in, it was pretty pretty close. I mean, I had to get on a private plane to go get them, and we did it. And it was really interesting, some of the stories that you tell people nowadays, but I won't bore you with this one. But anyway, but it was really interesting. We signed 30 players, and 10 of them I was fortunate enough to go sign.
Sounds like you could have used a helicopter back there instead of an airplane. I'm assuming most of them were from around the state of Georgia, right?
Some were. We got a couple out of Tennessee, and I could tell you their names, but I won't do that. But we had some really good players, and Georgia's a great place to play college football. It's a great place to go to school. It's a great place to be a fan of. I mean, it's just a great place.
Well, most of my time is spent asking Claude Felton and those sports information guys questions, and they always answer it. So when Claude had a question for me to ask you, I told him that I would. And he said he wanted to know how you found out you were going to get the job. Because he said the night before, it was the bowl game against Michigan State in the Gator Bowl, and there had been some other coaches rumored. Coach Hafner was the offensive coordinator. I guess Bill Lewis had gone to East Carolina. Dale Strom's linebacker coach. But anyway, Claude was told by the president the night before to show up at a room at 7 a.m. He said when the door opened, you were sitting on the couch. He said he wants to know, when did Ray know he was getting that job, and how did that whole deal shake out? Because that happened pretty quick.
It did, and I can't tell you who told me because I swore them. They swore me to secrecy, but I can't tell you. But I was very fortunate. I mean, I was 32 years old, 33 years old, and it was like a babe in swaddling clothes. I mean, I didn't have a clue what was going on, and and when I got the job, Coach Hafner had applied for it, and also Bill Lewis, like you said, had gone. But there was a lot of people that wanted the job, and I put my name in the hat. And somebody said, "Well, why'd you do that?" And I said, "Everybody else is doing it, so I might as well do the same thing." So I did, and I was very fortunate, and I didn't do a very good job, but it wasn't because of my loyalty or my love for what the University of Georgia meant to me.
Kirby touched on his recruitment a little bit earlier. What do you remember that? I mean, he's just a kid from Bainbridge, from South Georgia, like you said, and he remembered a late flip. You knew you were going to have him in the program some way, shape, or form, but do you have any early recollections or first memories of Kirby Smart as a player? Because obviously now Georgia fans can't get enough of him with all the great things that he's done in these last 4 years.
Yeah. Well, the reason we didn't offer him the scholarship to start with, because you categorize people and you think you can do a pretty good job of it, and we had numbers, and we had guys that said they were coming, and then when it's signing date back in those days, when a guy didn't sign, you had another scholarship, so you knew who you wanted to give it to. And Kirby was a guy that he was in a position that we had a lot of guys already committed, so it wasn't a big priority. But when we lost one of our players, he was the first guy we called, and I think it was a great move by us at Georgia, and I think he's done an outstanding job here.
Certainly, he was able to get on the field with all that talent one way or another. I mean, he found his way on that special teams, and
he was a good player. Don't let him tell you all that. He played well. He did a great job for us.
Yeah, that's pretty. Well, you also wasn't Will Muschamp one of your guys as well? What was the story with Will and how he ended up in Georgia?
Will came as a walk-on, I believe. Now, I don't want no disrespect to Will. I mean, but he walked on, and within about a week or two, we gave him a scholarship. And he was. We had him, and then we had Mike Bobo. They all three were here at the same time, and all three of them are head coaches or were head coaches. And so, I'm proud of all of them. I'm proud of everybody that played for us at Georgia. But, there's some guys that you realize they're out there getting chewed on if they don't win. So, I have sympathy for them.
No doubt. One of the players you signed was one of my personal favorites, and I think he does a tremendous job with the color analysis on the Georgia Radio Network, and that's Eric Zier. And Eric was a midterm enrollee, and I think at that point, Coach, that was pretty cutting edge for a kid to enroll early. What was the story of getting Eric Zier into Georgia and him coming early?
Well, we were very fortunate to sign him, and he was really a great player for us. And we were fortunate enough that back in those days, you had to have so many on scholarship, and we had a space to bring him in early, and he wanted to come in early, and he came in for spring practice and really did a good job. And I think he started or played as a true freshman.
Well, he did, and maybe some irony. I know there's a lot of self-deprecation coming out of you about I didn't do this good and I didn't do that good. But Eric Zier was the all-time leading passer in the Southeastern Conference when he finished his career. Now, you may not have thrown the ball much as a quarterback, but you sure made up for it when you were calling the plays. And how did Georgia, kind of evolve into that style of offense with Eric from where they were when you were assistant coach with Coach Dooley?
Well, we had some really good coaches on the offensive side and defensive side of the football, but Wayne McDuffie was our offensive coordinator, and unfortunately, Wayne was with us for about 4 years, but he did a great job because Wayne was at Florida State, and we had brought him in from pro football from I think the Falcons was where he was at. Wayne was just a great guy and a great football coach, and they did a great job. He changed a lot of our philosophy of what we did as far as running the football, and we got where we hoped we would do, run it and throw it, and we were very fortunate, and that's what attracted Eric Zier to come play for us.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a lot of momentum built up, and that was something Kirby mentioned to me earlier, was the role you played in the lineage of Georgia football evolution. One of the big things that's happened for Kirby in the last 4 years is Georgia's facilities, have really mushroomed, grown. This McGill Society donor base has made a difference. I guess I'd want to ask you about contrasting it to where you were then, because Georgia's always had a lot of high school talent, but the facilities plan wasn't always the most aggressive. Was that something that you even thought about back then?
No, it didn't me, because I grew up in Moultrie, Georgia. So what we had up here was a lot better than what I had. So I wasn't going to complain. And I mean no disrespect to Moultrie. That's my hometown, and I love my hometown. And I was born and raised there with my mom, my dad, my sister, and my brother. And so I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying, we live 2 blocks from the stadium in my hometown, so I could walk up there and do anything. And you talking about a great place to grow up and be raised at. That was my hometown. And one of my best friends was our U.S. Senator, Saxby Chambliss, who was from Moultrie. And so I had a good relationship with Saxby and a lot of people in Moultrie, and just a great place.
It was kind of interesting. I was just thinking about it. Georgia's coming off this big bowl win over Baylor. And, here we had Kirby on. That's the last game he played. Baylor was the first game that you coached at Georgia. When I'm looking here at this media guide, it looks like a win in Athens. Do you remember your first game as a Georgia head coach running out there? Was that a moment to reflect on, or had you been out there so many times as an assistant that it blended in?
No, I was 34 years old. I was sweating like a dog in heat. I was nervous. I ain't gonna lie about it. And when that game was over with, though, I mean, you kind of got an idea of what's gonna happen. But it got me. I'm gonna tell you. And I forget the head coach that I was against, and I can't remember his name right now. But he was one of the finest men that college football had, and I can't even remember his dadgum name.
Yeah, and then it looked like you had a win over Mississippi State, and then South Carolina bit you. Then it got pretty real. And what's that like? Now all of a sudden you're the guy everybody's looking at after the game.
Yeah, they're chewing on you pretty good. You learn a lot. You learn a lot about people. You learn a lot what gets people excited or what doesn't. And and we didn't do probably as good a job coaching as we should have. And we had some really good players, but maybe we didn't use them in the right way. But I'd never, ever blamed the player for anything because we recruited them and we got them here, and that's what we got to play with.
Well, you're still pretty hard on yourself, I'd say. There were some big wins, and of course, one of them, a mutual friend, Gene Stallings. You say that. I mean, you beat a Gene Stallings team, and of course, what Gene did at Alabama, he got Alabama about as close as they'd been to Paul Bear Bryant. Obviously, what Nick Saban has done in the last 15 years is impressive, but back then it was a different Alabama that Gene took over, and you were able to get a win over Alabama. You told me earlier that was one of your favorite wins of your career because of your respect for Coach Stallings.
Gene was, outside of my father, was probably one of the greatest influences in my life. And even though I didn't coach around him, I didn't coach for him or anything like it, it's just when you talk to him and how he would kind of lead you and help you. And I just had a lot of respect for him. And he was really good to me. And I thought a lot of him. And when we beat him after that game, I'm not going to tell you what he told me because it's not what it is because I've told you off the air. But I just thank the world of Gene Stallings. I'll do anything in the world. Matter of fact, I was just with him just recently. Jimmy Rain, the Yellowwood guy, took about 5 or 6 of us, and I think we went to Montana, and we went up there, and Gene was one of them. And we just had a great time. But Gene he's a special man in my life.
And you mentioned Pat Dye, former Bulldog Pat Dye, at Auburn, of course, the late great Pat Dye. He was in that group, and you were kind of part of that fraternity of the 1990s SEC coaches. Was there much interacting with Coach Dye? Because I know when I talked with him, he still talked like I know he's an Auburn guy, but he also loved the Bulldogs.
Yeah, he did, and he was a good one. And Pat was, he was on the trip that I was just on recently when in Montana, I believe it was. And he went with us. And Pat's always, he's always been a guy that you look at, he's going to be on the cutting edge. And he's done a great job at Auburn. And he did a great job. As a matter of fact, my oldest daughter, that's where she went to school. She went to Auburn University. And I don't know of a child that's ever had a better experience in college than my oldest daughter. She loved Auburn University. And it was a great place for her.
Yeah, those Auburn, I'll tell you, that's one, that fan base there, they'll fight. It don't take much to get them fighting. As you had to line up across from them as a player and coached against them. Well, Coach, I don't know if you know it or not, but typically, today would have been the first day of SEC Media Days, and you're about 30 minutes in. You're probably wondering why you agreed to do this interview. I'm probably wearing you out with too many questions, but I want to pretend like we're at SEC Media Days now, and I want to ask you about some of the current situations. And I know some things you say you don't know enough about, and some things you might know a little bit more about. But when you look at what we're facing, this crisis, I guess I'd want to get a general idea what your thoughts are, because I see what Kirby and George are doing with these kids on campus and testing them and taking care of them. And some people are saying, well, there shouldn't be football. And some people are saying, well, they might be safer on campus where they got the doctors. Do you have a general feel or a thought about college football right now and where they're at with this? Tough one, I know.
It is. And I probably would lean towards, when you go to a parent's home, you tell them, you look them in the eyes and you say, I'm going to take care of your child. If he will pay attention and he will listen to me, I will take care of him. And I don't mean paying him or anything like that. I mean, just help him. I just have a hard time with seeing Georgia playing football when this virus is still there. And there's no cure for it. That's just me now. And if I was a parent and my son was here, or son was at Auburn, or son's at Florida, or Southern Cal, I mean, I'm not real sure I would want my child to play if there's nothing that could cure it. I mean, you're going out there every week, and you don't have a clue whether or not you're going to get the virus or what. I mean, we all have that enough now. I mean, you sit there and watch TV, and it's just they're just hammering you day after day after day, and so I'm cautious, and I would wager to not play, but that's me. I'm a worrier, and I've got children, and I've got grandchildren, and I don't want somebody to walk up and give it to them.
Right. Yeah, you have to bring them home.
That's just me.
Have to bring them home for that. Now, what about this college football playoff? It's changed a couple of times. We saw the BCS with Roy Kramer, the commissioner, and now we see the college football playoff. What do you think about the way they decide this with the committee of 13 different people voting on the teams that should be in? How would that sit with you as a head coach? You good with that system?
Yeah, if I was one of the four. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. I mean, you can't keep playing all year, so you got to draw the line at some point in time. And I think they've done a pretty good job. And Roy Kramer started all that, and Coach Kramer was really an outstanding person.
What do you remember about those meetings? I had an opportunity to introduce Roy into the Lansing Hall of Fame. He was actually a football coach at Central Michigan, Division II coach, and won a national title there before he was the Vandy AD. But I remember talking to Coach Stallings about it. And he said, I don't know if Roy liked me very much because he didn't favor that divisional split. Where were you at with that? What were your thoughts when they split East and West? And because apparently not everybody in the league felt real good about that when Roy Kramer went that direction.
No, they didn't. But, hey, I was just tickled to have a job. I mean, I wasn't too worried about anything. I mean, Gene would express his opinion a lot more than some people, but he had a right to.
Yeah, he'd been around. Well, Coach, I can't thank you enough for coming on tonight and sharing some background and how you've been doing and some stories about recruiting some of these coaches. I mean, your coaching tree it's pretty impressive when you think about it, and certainly you're the man that brought Kirby Smart to Georgia. Now Georgia represents the Bulldogs' great hope of winning another national title. And boy, I know that you got to be proud when you turn on the TV and you see Kirby out there. And I was just tickled. I tell you, as soon as he found out that you were doing this show, I mean, he was on it, and he is a guy that, as he said, he is very specific with his time. So it's pretty clear there was a pretty special relationship there. Well,
I kind of got a little emotional there for a while, but I think the world of Kirby and his family. His dad was just off the charts when I was recruiting South Georgia as an assistant coach, and I got to know Kirby's dad and Kirby. And then when I got the job, he was here with me, and he's an outstanding person. And if I had a son, which I don't, I have two daughters, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love my daughters, but if I had a son, I would take my son and tell him you're going to play for Kirby Smart at the University of Georgia.
Well, that is the highest compliment that a coach can give. Well, Coach, thanks again for joining us. I'll let you get back at it. I know you stayed at the office late, and I know the Bulldog fans are excited to get to see you again. And a lot of them, like I said, I got my Zaxby's waiting on me. I promise you, I'm a black and blue salad guy.
You keep eating that salad, baby. I'm telling you, it's doing good.
That's good stuff. Ray Goff, former Georgia coach, 1976 SEC Player of the Year here on Ingles on the Beat. This COVID-19 has been a challenging time for all of us. And, we got to thank the people at Ingles for the job that they've done. They've really stayed on the front line and continue to serve. I want to take a minute now and recognize what Ingles has done with this special message from our sponsor.
It's in our hearts to feel for you. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad, but we stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back, with open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand, community strong.
Well, welcome back. Mike Griffith here. And certainly that was a a fun interview with Coach Goff. And, I have talked with him a few times leading up to this show, but I can tell you folks that Coach Goff is the same person when you talk with him in person as what you just witnessed. That interview right there, he is as down to earth, polite, and humble of a guy as I think I've ever encountered. And, and I was really pleasantly surprised, when Kirby found out that Ray Goff was going to be on DawgNation tonight. Kirby Smart was like, I'll do it. I mean, it was when do you need me? How's it going to go? I mean, the love that players have for their coaches, it just tells you everything. And you can't help but think that part of how Kirby Smart operates as a recruiter and as a relationship guy, Ray Goff played a part of that. Now, obviously, Kirby grew up the son of a coach and learned a great deal from his father. But that relationship and Kirby thanking Coach Goff for that opportunity, players never forget the guys that believed in him and gave him that opportunity. And obviously, Coach Goff was very proud of Kirby as well when he said, hey, don't let him tell you any different. He was a very good player. And obviously, Kirby was, as he became an all-SEC safety in addition to his all-academic performances at Georgia. And, the 1990s for Georgia, for me personally, that's kind of when I started covering the SEC. And I always had a very positive impression of the Georgia Bulldogs, whether I was covering Auburn, Alabama, or Tennessee. I came to Sanford Stadium as a beat writer for the opposing team for all three of those schools. And the class that Ray Goff exhibited, whether it was at the SEC media days when he was at the head coach, whether it was the post-game press conferences, I think that's an important part of Georgia history. Certainly, I think Georgia fans are doggone thankful that Ray recruited Kirby Smart. I mean, I don't know if we'd be here where we're at right now if Kirby Smart hadn't played at Georgia. You think about that. I know Will Muschamp is probably feeling pretty happy that he had an opportunity at Georgia and Ray Goff took him in, as well as Mike Bobo. So Eric Zier, the great running backs. I didn't even get into that with Ray. Garrison Hurst and Terrell Edwards. You think about Hines Ward and Hastings. Just very interesting when you consider the Ray Goff era. And you know what? No, it wasn't perfect. Coach Goff is awful hard on himself. But the reality of it is that most coaches at some point in their careers do get fired. And that's just how it goes. I thought he had a decent run at Georgia more than anything else. So the talent he recruited, the class that he represented, and certainly even now how he represents himself. I know that Georgia Bulldog fans, we're excited to have an opportunity to see Coach Goff as he lives right down here in Oconee County, still works and serves the community now with all these different Zaxby's locations. So I'm going to look at your comments now. If you've got any questions for me, it was kind of a busy day. I don't know if you had an opportunity to read the stories about the Southeastern Conference today. The athletic directors had their in-person meetings in Birmingham. Commissioner Greg Sankey issued an official statement. I see Connor Riley has a story up on that. And what Commissioner Sankey said was that it is clear the current circumstances related to COVID-19 must improve, and we will continue to closely monitor developments around the virus on a daily basis. In the coming weeks, we will continue to meet regularly with campus leaders via video conferences and gather relevant information while guided by medical advisors. We believe by late July, we will provide the best clarity for making the important decisions ahead of us. More of the same from Sankey: concerned, conscientious of the COVID-19 numbers, and sticking with that late July timeline as we wonder what's going to happen with the Georgia football season. Now, come Wednesday, Kirby Smart and his staff are going to be able to oversee the Georgia workouts. Now, they're not throwing a football around. It's still only 8 hours a week, but it's going to give Kirby a chance and his staff a chance to be in person, watching and monitoring the results of these players. And I think you're going to see the hierarchy start to shake out at different positions as far as coaches getting an idea of who can physically do what. Also important to note today, big news that JT Daniels, the quarterback transfer from Southern Cal, he was declared eligible by the NCAA. So throw another quarterback in the Georgia quarterback derby. It certainly sounds like Jamie Newman has the reins. Kirby said the competition will continue, but he spoke on a recent ESPN podcast about Jamie Newman showing leadership. Can't stress enough how important that is for a quarterback. It all starts with leadership. And I probably should have asked Coach Goff about that with him himself being a quarterback and the 1976 SEC Player of the Year, and then coaching up the one-time, all-time leading passer in SEC history, Eric Zires. So Ray Goff been around a quarterback or two, and certainly Kirby Smart now with a lot of opportunities, a lot of options there at the quarterback position. So I'm going to take a look and see if you guys have any questions for me. I see Mike Gay says there's only 2 weeks of it. It is. It's going to be 2 weeks of the workouts. These voluntary workouts started June 8th. Now, this is going to be countable activity. What they call countable activity will start Wednesday. Kirby and his staff overseeing workouts for 2 weeks. And then they get to practice with a football and go 20 hours a week. Now, one thing that may happen between now and the date of July 29th is Georgia may file an appeal so that Kirby and his coaches can move their 20-hour week up 2 days earlier. Because as things stand, Georgia's going to start 2 days later than everyone else because the Bulldogs' scheduled opener is September 7th on a Monday night at Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Virginia. Well, that game is in doubt. And certainly the location might also be in doubt. I don't know how much sense it makes for Mercedes-Benz Stadium to hold a neutral site game if there's no fans or reduced fans. Now, obviously, there would have to be some moving and shaking between Georgia and Virginia to work out who might be the home team and things like that, or where that game might be played, if it's played at all. But because of that doubt, maybe Georgia can start when everybody else starts as far as practices, because their season may not be starting 2 days later. Heck, if these preseason bye games get knocked out, there's still a chance that Georgia's opening game could be September 19th in Tuscaloosa. And if that's the case, then you would think they would be able to start practice the same time as Alabama. And if you don't think 2 days makes a difference, then you weren't watching earlier in the program when Kirby Smart was talking about the value of time. If there's one thing about Kirby Smart that stands out to me, well, there's obviously more than one, but one thing that stands out to me is Kirby is incredibly efficient with his time. And I believe Dan Lanning was the one when we interviewed him at the Sugar Bowl one year, and we asked him what he learned from Coach Smart, and he talked about time allotment. Kirby Smart does not waste 1 second, folks. I'm telling you. And that's why we're so glad on DawgNation he joined us tonight at the start of the program. But again, that was a coach-player relationship. And you saw Coach Goff get a little emotional there, and you saw Coach Smart with a little different energy level. He wasn't in a hurry to come off of the show. He wasn't in a hurry to rush through any questions. He wanted to be here for his head coach. That's a really special moment. Really glad that we were able to share that with you on DawgNation's Ingles on the Beat show. Heath Wright comments, going to be so disappointed if we don't get to see our Dogs play this year. Heath, I'm right there with you, man. I'm still optimistic. I think that Greg Sankey and the SEC presidents and athletic directors, they're going to be very thorough. You know, you heard Ray Goff talk about the importance of taking care of those players. We've heard Kirby talk about that, how much he loves his players and how happy he is to be around them. And there's two schools of thought on that. You know, Coach Goff was talking about how he'd bring his kids home. Well, the reality of it is that maybe some of these kids wouldn't go home and wouldn't have the opportunity to be sheltered in place. Maybe they'd be out in the community. I know that Gene Stallings talked about thinking that he could take better care of his kids on his campus than they could at home. So there's a lot of different thoughts on this. There's a lot of different philosophies. They all have merit. Certainly everyone, there's no right and no wrong here. And it's going to be very difficult for these coaches, presidents, athletic directors to kind of sort this out and say what is truly best for the college football player. And I think that's what Greg Sankey is getting at when he talks about looking at the numbers. I'm still optimistic. I'm a very task-oriented person. I don't mind telling you that on the front end. You got to know yourself and know what you know and know what you don't know. I would probably have a higher risk tolerance. But then again, I was jumping out of airplanes when I was 18, 19, and 20. So that tells you something about me. I might have hit my head one too many times. What else do we got here? Cody Taylor also concerned about the start of the season. I understand that, folks. I understand, but all we can do is control what we can control. And I don't want to be a walking, talking Kirby Smart cliche here, but there was something that Kirby said that stuck with me throughout this entire pandemic. And how Kirby challenges his players to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's what we've all had to do through COVID-19. Now, the question is, to what extent do we apply that to the football season? I break it down and I look at players and games as a separate issue than fans in the stands. Now, I know that Georgia fans are loyal. They love to tailgate. And certainly Sanford Stadium, to me, is probably the best campus environment in the country, if not one of the best campus environments in the country. And that part may be missing. But as far as the players on the field, that's a different issue. The level of testing, the trends that we see with the player positives, and thank goodness and thank the Lord that, these guys have been going through practices for more than a month, and we haven't seen a serious complication with a college football athlete yet. And I say yet because I think we all know it's probably only a matter of time. As thorough as these teams and these doctors have been, with their programs and with their testing and their protocols, you might have somebody slip between the cracks eventually with an underlying medical condition, or somebody who just doesn't react well to the virus, or a different strain. There's so much complexity to this, and that's why Greg Sankey is going to take every second that he possibly can before he makes a decision. I see Terry Shell, thankful that Coach Goff was able to come on tonight. I was very thankful. Again, for me, as somebody that's covered the SEC for darn near 30 years now, Ray Goff was one of my favorite coaches to deal with just because of how pleasant he is. And if you folks saw that segment with him, I mean, what you see is what you get. And I love the coaches like that. Even if they get a little feisty, I covered Coach Stallings at Alabama, and what you saw was what you got. And sometimes what you got was a little tough to chew on, but with Coach Goff, he was always just so appreciative of being at the University of Georgia. You saw, that story of him giving the signing bonus check back to the Denver Broncos. Think about that. Here's, Coach Goff getting cut from the Denver Broncos, and they say, keep this money. And he said, no, sir, you keep it. What athlete today, what person today gives back a signing bonus check? I think that is one of the most remarkable, but also telling stories about the man that Ray Goff is and was at the University of Georgia. So I'm glad that you guys enjoyed that. Van Alexander, we've got a Marine in here, Semper Fi. Brother Van, thank you very much for your service. Always enjoy this. Van, no, sir, I was not a Ranger. I was 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg, and that was about all the excitement that I needed. Even at that time, I had 23 jumps, and for me, it was an opportunity, and I was able to get the GI Bill, and I'm very thankful that I had that opportunity to serve in the military. Christopher White notes off of Greg Sankey's words earlier, waiting to see how Major League Baseball and the NBA deal with this. Christopher, that's a great observation. And, the NFL teams are supposed to report to their training camps on July 21st. What's that? That's just a week from tomorrow. So I do think we'll be equipped with a lot more information, and we'll have an opportunity to see how the NFL handles this in their training camps. You mentioned the NBA, and they're operating under that bubble. We've already seen some complications there, some players that have crossed the line and broken out to get the food. I can't remember the name of the player that did that a little bit earlier, but just goes to show you how hard it is to control the student athletes. And, there were a lot of student athletes that were testing positive earlier once these voluntary workouts began in June. And the thing that I pointed out is, hey, these programs only had them under their supervision for 8 hours a week. And I did the math on it. And 7 times 24, right? That's 168 hours in a week. And let's say these kids are sleeping 8 hours a night. That's 56 hours. So you take 56 for 1 minus 168, you're at 112. And then you take away those 8 hours a week that you're supervised. That leaves 104 hours of unsupervised activity. Now, in season, that changes, and the argument that I make, and there is two sides of the coin, is that these kids are pretty much sequestered 95% of the time anyway. When you're in a Georgia football program and you think about those morning workouts and you think about those morning treatment sessions, and now class even if we're talking about online classes for athletes, and there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, Joe Burrow had 2 years at LSU where he never stepped foot in the classroom, and that didn't stop them from winning a national title or hurt his place in LSU history. They want to retire his number. He didn't even go in a classroom. So if you had one fall semester where kids learned online, they would still have time allotted for that and probably not even leave that Georgia football building. And then you think about the practices and then the treatments and then the tutorial that they go to after their workouts. there's really not a lot of time in season for those players to be out in the public mixing and matching. Now, right now is a different story, but I almost feel like a Georgia football player would be safer if he was in school and in the program and kind of going through that car wash every day of all those activities versus having all that free time, whether it be in the city of Athens or back in their hometown. But again, this is going to be something that people at a lot higher pay grades and a lot more expertise than myself. And I like to say I know what I know and what I don't know. And, there's some points of this discussion that are probably beyond my comprehension or knowledge. I guarantee you those ADs talked about a lot of scenarios. One of the scenarios that we discussed last week, and Greg McGarity was the one that put me onto this, and I think Greg was right. And, Greg does such a good job as the Georgia athletic director. I don't think people appreciate Greg McGarity enough and really understand his role and how he works with Kirby Smart. You've really got to, when you've got a visionary like Kirby and a high energy guy like Kirby. I mean, listen, Kirby is a get it done guy. He's going to take the shortest distance between 2 points, and it takes a special administrator to be able to work with a coach like that. Not all ADs could handle that. You've got to have somebody like Greg who's done this long enough, who's comfortable with his position, and who looks at his job as a facilitator. Greg McGarity looks at his job as a facilitator for his coach's visions. He wants to work with all of them. He wants to enable them. And I think he's done that with Kirby Smart in incredibly good fashion. Part of Alabama's success was Mal Moore. And I had a chance to get to know Mal Moore when I covered Alabama. And let me tell you, Mal Moore, the late, great Mal Moore, was an absolute prince of a man and certainly a dignitary of sorts, certainly a great ambassador, but had a temperament very similar to Greg McGarity, and that, he wasn't an excitable guy. He wasn't a guy that was going to fly off the handle and show any kind of temper, any kind of short fuse. He was a very thoughtful man, very philosophical. And I look at Greg McGarity in the same vein, and I think that's why him and Kirby work so doggone good together. And it has just been magical for Georgia. When I look at how Georgia's become this annual championship contender, and now you've got this $81 million football building going up, even as this crisis stares us in the eyes, because of the Georgia leadership and having that $103 million reserve fund, Georgia has moved forward with this football building. They haven't said, hey, put a freeze on it, put a cap on it, or we're going to have to cut this or that. No, Georgia's in such good shape because of the responsibility of the leadership. And I tell you that background because I don't think many people really appreciate how an athletic director works these days, and maybe don't understand the dynamics of working with I don't know, fireball may be too strong of a word for Kirby, but he's a rising star and he blazes a fast trail. And Kirby's gotten a lot done in a short amount of time because of that. But it's taken the cooperation and the same general movement of the program. Can't tell you how important that is. And actually, I could show you evidence. All you need to do is look around at some of the other programs in the SEC that have struggled and look at how their leadership has faltered and how it's changed and it hasn't been consistent. And it seems like such a simple thing, but folks, trust me, it's not. But Greg gave me the tip last Friday when I called him. I said, hey, Mr. McGarity, I said, I noticed the Big Ten has made this decision, no conference games. What are your thoughts on that? And he said, well, the SEC had considered several different scenarios. And one of them was conference-only games, but it wasn't necessarily at the forefront of the league discussions. And, Greg McGarity said this is probably a topic now that will get accelerated when we meet Monday. I don't know what accelerated means. I don't know the extent of which the ADs discussed conference-only. But one thing Greg told me was that, maybe if you go conference-only, it would be a 10-game schedule instead of an 8-game schedule. And how do you do that? And the first thing I thought about was, you've got to do it in a fair and an equitable manner. You can't just sit back and say, well, we're going to redraw the whole schedule and now this team's going to play this team. No. You've got a schedule in place. And then you've got the 2021 games and the 2022 games. And what changes in 2021 and 2022 is for Georgia is the different teams from the West Division that would rotate on the schedule. Georgia would catch probably a little bit of a break. They would get a home game with Arkansas that's scheduled in 2021, and they would get a road game against Mississippi State at Starkville that's currently scheduled for 2022. If you were to take those 2 games and add them to this year's schedule, which to me, again, because those games are already in line to be played, accelerating those cross-division schedules seems like the most fair way to do it to me. Now, I'm not the commissioner of the SEC. Florida may not agree with me because the Florida Gators would pick up a home game against Alabama and a road game to Texas A&M. And before any of those Gators start crying those crocodile tears, nobody was complaining when Georgia has to play at Alabama and Auburn this year, and Florida gets a home game with an LSU team that lost half the roster to the NFL, and then a road game against Ole Miss. So all that would do to me is balance things up. I'll tell you this, that Florida bandwagon, all those people picking the Gators, that would come to a screeching halt. I hope that if the SEC goes conference games only, that's the model they'll choose rather than drawing names out of a hat or redrawing the whole schedule. Because I think we've all kind of got it in our minds what we're doing on those weekends, whether we're going to the stadium or watching it on the television set. So that's kind of my hope for Georgia and the schedule. Ideally, maybe they could keep some of these bye games. I know one thing that Kirby always talks about, and I know the fans don't always want to see it or hear it, but, Kirby does think a lot of these bye games, and he does think a lot of these other programs, and he recognizes the importance of playing the teams like an Arkansas State or a Murray State. These teams that are getting anywhere from $800,000 to $1.5 million for these bye games. Kirby Smart understands, as a former student athlete himself, the value of this, because these bye games, they're what enable these programs like Arkansas State, Murray State to fund their non-revenue programs as well as their football programs. So when the Big Ten blindsided everybody by going conference only, they really destroyed a lot of these Mid-American Conference programs' athletic budgets. That's going to lead to people losing jobs. That's going to lead to kids losing sports scholarships and opportunities. Heck, you look out west at BYU and Hawaii, they don't even have games the first 4 weeks because the Pac-12 just followed the Big Ten's lead. What are they going to do? I sure hope that the Big 12, and I know they don't have a full allotment of teams, but I would love to see the Big 12 pick up maybe a BYU, maybe a Boise State. I don't know what type of special allowances could be drawn up if they were to go conference only. But I do know that, there's going to have to be a lot of solutions and a lot of work done if this season is going to take place. And again, I'm an optimist, and I'm going to continue to believe that we're going to have it. Tom Harlow has a great point. He says those programs that shut down may not come back. Tom, this is something that could trickle down into our society and change a lot of things. For example, I coached my daughter and a lot of other girls in travel softball, and most of the girls that I coached ended up getting scholarships. And that was their vision when they came to play for my traveling team around Tennessee. We travel all over the state and even into Georgia at times to play these tournaments, and the parents paid a lot of money and hotels. But the vision was that your kid was going to have an opportunity, to play collegiate sports. We've seen it with basketball. Certainly we see it with travel baseball. We see it with soccer. We see tennis on these junior pro. But all of a sudden, if these scholarships aren't there, that's a piece of our society that's going to change. So there's a lot of unintended consequences to shutting down sports. And, and I think that some of these guys made a really good point here. I'm looking at some of these other comments. You guys are starting to talk about who's going to take over at quarterback. I see Philip Jordan Wells is in the room. Always interesting when Philip comes in the room. He's always got some funny comments. And Graham Nicholson now talking about, putting a conference together for the independents. Graham, that's a good idea. I'd like to see that. Notre Dame is one of those teams. We're kind of wondering what's going to happen to the Irish. They have kind of a relationship with the ACC for basketball. And I know that David Cutcliffe recently said that if Notre Dame wants to jump in the ACC for football, they're going to have to share some of that NBC television money. So keep an eye on how that works. Or does maybe Notre Dame go independent? I think Army would be included in that. We mentioned BYU a moment ago. There's a few other independents right now slipped my mind. But I do think we could scrabble some things together because I think to the point that Tom Harlow made a minute ago, if these programs go away, they may not come back. I mean, just imagine if you're an athletic director trying to approach one of your boosters or one of your major donors in 2021 after a 2020 doesn't happen and saying, we need $10 million or $15 million or $20 million to get this program going again, because COVID-19's over. And the booster said, well, what about COVID-20 or COVID-21? because now we realize just how susceptible we are as a society. We've got to come up with some plans. There's got to be some evolution here. And I know there's been some great technological advances. I mean, obviously tonight we had Coach Goff, and earlier today, how about that? Earlier today, Kirby's operations guy was there helping Coach Goff get set up on the Zoom because he just never had a reason to do one, But when I told him I wanted to, bring him back and put him in front of the Georgia fans, Coach Goff was willing to do that. And I just, to me, that told me how much he still loves the Bulldogs and in Georgia, even though he hadn't coached here in over 20 years. He's still proud of these guys. And you heard what he said, that if he had a son, he would want him to play for Kirby Smart. And like I said, I hope you saw that moment at the start of the show. It was very clear how proud Coach Goff was of Kirby Smart, and also how important it was for Kirby Smart to make that appearance and be a part of Coach Goff's show here. So we've had Mark Richt and we've had Tom Crean. We're going to have to try to get all these Georgia coaches on. I got to thank Claude Felton and that Georgia Sports Information Office. I know fans aren't supposed to root for sports information guys, and this sounds like politics, but I'm telling you, when I tell you that the guy's a Hall of Famer, he is literally a Hall of Famer. I introduced Claude Felton into the Hall of Fame in South Bend, Indiana, in about 2007, 2008. Never dreamed that I'd one day be working with him through the DawgNation relationship with the University of Georgia. It's been fantastic. I see the quarterback conversations going. I'll just tell you this. Jamie Newman has done enough to impress Kirby Smart that Kirby talked about him extensively. Jamie Newman has a great arm. He's very athletic. He can do a lot of different things. And now that Georgia has quarterback depth, I think one of the most important notes is when we talk about the RPOs, the run pass option, the quarterback running the ball will be a threat now because there is some very good quarterbacks behind him. In addition to a guy like JT, hearing great things about Dwan Mathis and Carson Beck. I'm going to wrap it up tonight. I want to thank all of you for joining me here on Ingles on the Beat. Don't forget, tomorrow, 10 o'clock, Brandon Adams, DawgNation Daily. What a great job Brandon has done. It's been a long off season, and every time I turn it on, I see hundreds of people watching Brandon's show. He's engaged, the voice of the fan. I know he's going to have a lot of opinions about what's happened with JT Daniels. He had that live show he did today. He'll have some follow-up. I'm sure he'll have some thoughts on Ray Goff and Kirby Smart. And then come Wednesday night, you're going to have Jeff Sentel with Before the Hedges, his recruiting show. Connor Riley does those Tuesday night shows, and we're going to have a cover 4 this week. So keep an eye out for that. We're still kind of trying to figure out where that's going to slide in. And then I'll be back with Friday Night Mike. So thanks again for joining us. I'd like to thank Ray Goff for joining me tonight. I'd like to thank Kirby Smart for taking a few moments out of his schedule to have a moment with his former head coach and his recruiter. And obviously my producer, Michael Carvel. Great job putting that together. And Bryant Gant for assisting us technically in getting Coach Goff set up on his phone. So everybody have a great Monday night, and we'll see you again later this week.